Section 36 of John Inglesant, A Romance. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Claire. John Inglesant, A Romance by Joseph Henry Shorthouse. Chapter 23. In spite, however, of the reasonings and prescriptions of the physician, the oppression upon Inglesant's brain became more intolerable. Every new object seemed burnt into it by the sultry outward heat, and by his own fiery thoughts. The livid, scorched plains, with the dark foliage, the hot piazzas and highways, seemed to him thronged with ghastly phantoms, all occupied more or less in some evil or fruitless work. As to his physical sense, all objects seemed distorted and awry. So to his mental perception, the most ordinary events bore in them the germs, however slight, of that terrible act of murderous terror that had marred and ruined his own life. In some form or other, in the passionate look, in the gambler's gesture, in the lover's glance, in the juggler's grimace, in the passion of the little child, he saw the stealthy trail of the Italian murderer, before whose cowardly blow his brother fell. The cool, neglected courts of Padua afforded no relief to his racked brain, no solace to his fevered fancy. He frequented the shadowed churches and the solemn masses daily without comfort, for his conscience was once more weighed with the remembrance of Serenus de Cresse, and of his own rejection of the narrow path of the Holy Cross. A sense of oppression and confusion rested upon him mentally and physically, so that he could see no objects steadily and clearly, but without a phantasmagoria of terrible bright colors, and within a mental chaos and disorder without a clue. A constant longing filled his mind to accept de Cresse's offer, and he would have returned to France but for the utter impossibility of making the journey in his condition of health. He withdrew himself more and more from society, and at last, without informing his friends of his intention, he retired to a small monastery without the city, about a mile from the Treviso gate, and requested to be admitted as a novice. The result of this step at the outset was beneficial, for the perfect seclusion and the dim light of the cells and shaded garden relieved the brain and restored the disordered sense of vision. It was some time before Don Augustino received intelligence, through the prior, of this step of his friends. He immediately came to Padua, and had several interviews with Inglesant, but apparently failed to produce any impression upon him. He then returned to Florence, and induced the Cardinal Ranucci, from whose influence upon Inglesant he hoped much, to accompany him to Padua. The cardinal was a striking-looking and singularly handsome man, his countenance resembling the reputed portraits of Molière, whose bust might be taken for that of a pagan god. There was the same open, free expression as of a man who confined his actions by no bounds, who tasted freely of that tree of good and evil, which it is reported transforms a man into a god, and of that other tree which, since the flaming sword of the cherubim kept the way to the true, had passed in the world for the tree of life, who had no prejudices nor partialities, but included all mankind, and all the opinions of men within the wide range of perfect tolerance and lofty indifference. He found Inglesant in his novice's dress walking in the small walled-in garden of the monastery, beneath the mulberry trees, his breviary in his hand. After the first greeting, the cardinal inquired touching his health. "You are familiar with English, Eminence," replied Inglesant, "and remember Hamlet, and you will therefore understand the state of a man for whom the world is too strong." "It is only the weak," replied the cardinal, "for whom the world is too strong. You know what Terence says, ita vita est hominum quasi cum ludus tesseris, or, as we should rather say, life is like a game of cards. You cannot control the cards, but of such as turn up you must make the most. Illud quod sedicit forte, id arte ut corrigus. The free will, the reason, and the power of self-command struggle perpetually with an array of chance incidents, of mechanical forces, of material causes, beyond foresight or control, but not beyond skillful management. This gives a delicate zest and point to life, which it would surely want if we had the power to frame it as we would. We did not make the world, and are not responsible for its state, but we can make life a fine art, and taking things as we find them, like wise men, mold them as may best serve our own ends. We are not all wise, your Eminence, and the ends that some of us make our aim are far beyond our reach." "I was ever moderate in my desires," said the cardinal with a smile, I shoot at none of these high-flying game. I am content to live from day to day and leave the future to the gods, in the meantime sweetening life as I can with some pleasing toys here and there to relish it." "You have read Don Quixote, Eminence," said Inglesant, "and no doubt hold him to have been mad." "He was mad, doubtless," replied the cardinal, smiling. "I am mad like him," replied the other. "I understand you," said the cardinal. "It is a noble madness from which we inferior natures are free. Nevertheless, it may be advisable for a time to consult some worldly physician, that by his help this nobleness may be preserved a little longer upon earth and among men." "No worldly physician knows the disease, much less the cure," said Inglesant. "Don Quixote died in his bed at last, talked down by petty commonplace, acknowledging his madness, and calling his noble life a mistake. How much more shall I, whose life has been the more ignoble for some transient gleams of splendor which have crossed its path in vain? The world is too strong for me, and heaven and its solution of life's enigma too far off." "There is no solution, believe me," said the cardinal. "No solution of life's enigma worth the reading. But suppose there be, you are more likely to find it at Rome than here. Put off that monk's dress and come with me to Rome. What solution can you hope to find brooding on your own heart on this narrow plot of grass, shut in by lofty walls? You and natures like yours make this great error. You are moralizing and speculating upon what life ought to be, instead of taking it as it is. And in the meantime it slips by you, and you are nothing and life is gone. I have heard, and you doubtless, in a fine concert of viols, extempore decant upon a thorough bass in the Italian manner, when each performer in turn plays such variety of decant in concordance to the bass as his skill and present invention may suggest to him. In this manner of play, the consonants invariably fall true upon a given note, and every succeeding note of the ground is met, now in the unison or octave, now in the concords, preserving the melody throughout by the laws of motion and sound. I have thought that this is life. To a solemn bass of mystery and of the unseen each man plays his own descant as his taste or fate suggests. But this manner of play is so governed and controlled by what seems a fatal necessity that all melts into a species of harmony, and even the very discords and dissonances, the wild passions and deeds of men, are so attempted and adjusted that without them the entire piece would be incomplete. In this way I look upon life as a spectacle, in theatro ludus. Have you sat so long that you are tired already of the play?" "I have read in some books," said Inglesant, "that it is not the play, only the rehearsal. The play itself is not given till the next life. But for the rest, your Eminence is but too right. There is no solution within my own heart, and no help within these walls." There can be little doubt that had Inglesant remained much longer in the monastery, he would have sunk into a settled melancholy. The quiet and calm, while it soothed his brain and relieved it of the phantoms that distracted it, allowed the mind to dwell exclusively upon those depressing thoughts and ideas which were exhausting his spirit and reducing him well nigh to despair. However undesirable at other times the cardinal's philosophic paganism might be, no doubt at this moment his society was highly beneficial to Inglesant, to whom indeed his conversation possessed a peculiar charm. It could indeed scarcely fail to attract one who himself sympathized with that philosophy of tolerance of, and attraction to, the multiform aspects of life which paganism and the cardinal equally followed. On the other hand, Ranucci had from the first been personally strongly attracted towards Inglesant, and as a matter of policy attached just importance to securing his services, both on account of what he had learnt from his brother and from the report of the Jesuits. After some further conversation, the cardinal returned to Padua in triumph, bringing Inglesant with him, whom he loaded with kindness and attention. A suite of apartments was placed at his disposal, certain of the cardinal's servants were ordered to attend him, and the finest horses were devoted to his use on the approaching journey. After waiting in Padua some days, to make preparations which were necessary in the neglected state of Inglesant's affairs, they set out for Rome. Don Augustino was still in Florence, the politics of his family not suffering him to visit the papal city at present. Their first day's journey took them through the fertile and well-cultivated Venetian states to Rovigo, where they crossed the Po, divided the territory of the Republic from the Pharisee, which state had lately been acquired by the Pope. This country, which, while it possessed princes of its own, had been one of the happiest and most beautiful parts of Italy, was now abandoned and uncultivated to such an extent that the grass was left unmown on the meadows. At Ferrara, a vast city which appeared to Inglesant like a city of the dead as he walked through streets of stately houses without an inhabitant, the chief concourse of people was the crowd of beggars who thronged round the cardinal's coach. After dinner, Inglesant left his companion, who liked to linger over his wine, and walked out into the quiet streets. The long, deserted vistas of this vast city, sleeping in the light and shadow of the afternoon sun, disturbed now and then only by a solitary footstep, pleased his singular fancies as Padua had done. He entered several of the churches, which were mean and poorly adorned, and spoke to several of the priests and loiterers. Everywhere he heard complaints of the poverty of the place, of the misery of the people, of the bad, unwholesome air caused by the dearth of inhabitants to cultivate the land. When he came to inquire into the causes of this, most held their peace, but one or two idlers, bolder or more reckless than the rest, seeing that he was a foreigner and ignorant that he was riding in the train of the cardinal, whispered to him something of the severity of the papal government, and of the heavy taxes and frequent confiscations by which the nephews of several popes had enriched themselves, and devoured many of the principal families of the city, and driven away many more. "They talk of the bad air," said one of the men to Inglesant. "The air was the same a century ago, when this city was flourishing under its own princes of so eminent a virtue and of so heroical a nobleness that they were really the fathers of their country. Nothing," he continued with a mute gesture of the hands, "can be imagined more changed than this is now." "But Bologna is under the Pope also," said Inglesant, "and is flourishing enough." "Bologna," he answered, "delivered itself up to the popedom upon a capitulation by which there are many privileges reserved to it. Crimes there are only punished in the persons of those who commit them. There are no confiscations of estates, and the good result of these privileges is evident, for though Bologna is neither on a navigable river nor the centre of a sovereignty where a court is kept, yet its happiness and wealth amaze a stranger, while we, ones equally fortunate, are like a city in a dream." Inglesant returned to the inn to the cardinal, and related what he had heard, to all which dismal stories of the prelate only replied by a significant gesture. The next morning, however, as he was entering his carriage, followed by his friend, he seemed to take particular notice of the crowd of beggars that surrounded the inn. In Inglesant's eyes they only formed part, together with the strange quiet streets, the shaded gardens, and the ever-changing scenes of their journey, in that shifting phantasm of form and colour, meaningless to him except as it might suddenly, and in some unexpected way, become a part and scene of the fatal drama that had seized upon and crippled his life. But to the cardinal, who had the training of a politician, though he subordinated politics to enjoyment, these swarms of beggars and these decaying states had at times a deeper interest. "These people," he said, as the carriage moved on, "certainly seem very miserable, as you told me last night. To those whose tastes lay that way, it would not be a useless business to inquire into these matters, and to try to set them right. Some day, probably far distant, some of us, or those like us who clothe in scarlet and fine linen, will have to pay a reckoning for these things." "They are less unhappy than I am," said Inglesant. "As to the luxurious persons of whom you speak, it has been my fate to be of their party all my life, and to serve them for very poor reward, and I doubt not that when their damnation, of which your eminence speaks, arrives, I shall share it with them. But it might seem to one who knows little of such things that some such attempt might be looked for from a sworn soldier and prince of the church." The cardinal smiled. The freedom with which Inglesant's sarcastic humour showed itself at times when the melancholy fit was upon him was one of the sources of attraction which attracted the young Englishman to his person. "Life is short," he said, "and the future very uncertain. Martyrs have died, nay, still harder fate, have lived long lives of such devotion as that which you wish me to attempt, and we see very little result. Christianity is not of much use, apparently, to many of the nations of the earth. Now, on my side, as I pass my life, I certainly enjoy this world, and I as certainly have cultivated my mind to sustain, as far as I can foresee, the demand and strain that will be put upon it, both in the exit from this life and in the entrance upon another. Why, then, should I renounce these two positive goods and embrace a life of restless annoyance and discomfort, of antagonism to existing systems and order, of certain failure, disappointment, and the peevish protestation of a prophet to whom the world will not listen?" "There is no reason why, certainly," said Inglesant, "for a sane man like your eminence. I see clearly it must only have been a madman who in all ages have been driven into the fire and upon the sword's point in pursuit of an idea which they fancied was worth the pain, but which, as they never realized it, they could never put to the test. I perceive your irony, said the cardinal, and I recognize your wit. What astonishes me is the interest you take in these old myths and dreary services. The charm of novelty must have worn itself out by this time. Christ is real to many men, said Inglesant, and the world seems to manifest within itself a remedial power such as may be supposed to be his. I do not dispute such a power, replied the cardinal. I only wonder at the attachment to these old myths which profess to expound it. The world has now been satisfied with them for some centuries, said Inglesant, and for my own part I cannot help thinking that, even in the blaze of a purer mythos, some of us will look back with longing to one of the days of the Son of Man. I do not perceive either that your eminence attempts to improve matters. I can afford to wait, replied the cardinal with lofty indifference. The myths of the world are slow to change. This one certainly, replied Inglesant with a smile, has been slow to change, perhaps because men found in it something that reminded them of their daily life. It speaks of suffering and of sin. The cross of Christ is composed of many other crosses, is the center, the type, the essence of all crosses. We must suffer with Christ whether we believe in him or not. We must suffer for the sin of others as for our own, and in this suffering we find a healing and purifying power and element. This is what gives to Christianity, in its simplest and most unlettered form, its force and life. Sin and suffering for sin, a sacrifice, itself mysterious, offered mysteriously to the divine nemesis or law of sin, dread, undefined, unknown, yet sure and irresistible with the iron necessity of law. This is the intellectual Christ the Platonic Socrates did not offer, hence his failure and the success of the Nazarene. Viscati, Galilei. End of section 36.